These are movies James Cameron almost directed, but didn't. Jurassic Park, he was actually a few hours late getting the rights, but Steven Spielberg got there first. A Planet of the Apes remake, which would have involved time-traveling apes and possibly Arnold Schwarzenegger. Fantastic Voyage. Dungeons and Dragons. Solaris, which eventually was directed by Steven Soderbergh. Alita Battle Angel, which was eventually directed by Robert Rodriguez. And finally, and I think most notably, Spider-Man, which he did enough scripts and developed enough that they actually used some of his ideas in the 2002 Spider-Man, including organic web shooters. He chose not to be credited for helping write that film. Movies Christopher Nolan almost directed, but didn't. A Howard Hughes biopic starring Jim Carrey. He was working on the script actually and was developing it, but got word that Martin Scorsese was a lot further in development and had cast Leonardo DiCaprio in his Howard Hughes biopic, so Christopher Nolan abandoned the project. The Keys to the Street, which was a book that was released in the 90s, focused on a young woman who begins investigating a series of grisly murders targeting homeless people in Regent's Park. He was briefly attached to this for Fox Searchlight, but instead chose to go to Warner Brothers and make Batman Begins. And he was interested in a movie version of the show The Prisoner, but bowed out. Not much is known about what happened to it. I wonder if the TV remake around that time, he was doing this in 2009, was the reason for it, but we don't really know. Stuff M. Night Shyamalan almost directed, but didn't. A Blink-182 music video. Apparently they bumped into each other at a restaurant, and he actually seriously considered and spent a lot of an afternoon developing a Blink-182 music video until he found out it wouldn't actually pay that much, so he didn't do it. I don't actually know which song, but apparently, according to them, this happened. He was offered the first Harry Potter, and he met with Rupert Grint, but that's pretty much as far as it went, apparently. The fourth Indiana Jones movie, it was pitched at one time for it to be written and directed by him. It was offered to him by Spielberg, and there's always been a rumor he worked on the actual script for Crystal Skull. And he was supposed to make some more sequels to The Last Airbender, but I'm not sure what happened with that. Movies Peyton Reed almost directed, but didn't. Apparently, he was an early choice for Guardians of the Galaxy. He was going to make a film, The Fifth Beatle, which was going to be about the Beatles' manager, which is the film he actually left and stopped working on to then go work on Ant-Man. And Fantastic Four, which was going to be very different. This was before even the Tim Story one happened, and it was going to be set in the 1960s. And sort of be a Hard Day's Night inspired Fantastic Four film. It sounds really cool. I sort of wish that it happened, especially when you think about Down with Love. Movies James Gunn almost directed, but didn't. He was considered for Amazing Spider-Man 3. They wanted to take the franchise in a different direction with Andrew Garfield, but he refused to make another Amazing Spider-Man film without Mark Webb. He pitched a Hitman movie, but the producer didn't really like him, so it didn't work out. He was working on a comedy called Pets, a comedy about a man who is abducted by aliens and then made into a household pet. It was going to be produced by Ben Stiller. I have no idea who would have been in this movie. When James Gunn first met with Warner Brothers to do The Suicide Squad, he originally majorly pitched that he would direct a Superman movie, which he ultimately didn't do then, but then of course would do later. Apparently when he did come to DC, one of the properties he was really interested in was Crypto the Superdog, but he decided not to do that. Stunt work Chad Stahelski did before he became a director. Was Keanu Reeves' stunt double on the entire Matrix trilogy and eventually became the stunt coordinator on those films. He did stunts for Escape from LA, Wild Wild West, Spider-Man 2 uncredited, Corky Romano, and Spy Kids 4. Chad Stahelski was also a close friend of Brandon Lee and actually studied and learned martial arts with him, and then when Brandon Lee died during the production of The Crow, was actually the stunt performer who replaced him and had Brandon Lee's face digitally imposed over him because he looked most like Brandon Lee at the time, and he actually knew how to move like him as well. So he was uncredited, who's the one who was his stand-in to be able to finish The Crow after his untimely death. Movies Ava DuVernay almost directed, but didn't. Black Panther. She met with Marvel and was highly considered for the role, but felt that they weren't aligned on the story and she would most likely leave for creative differences, so she decided not to do the project. New Gods, which would have been an adaptation of Jack Kirby's famous comic. I think this actually would have been interesting, particularly when you think of Wrinkle in Time. I'm sort of sad it got canceled ultimately. A Prince biopic for Netflix. Met with the Prince estate and was working on it for a little bit, but unfortunately had to leave the project due to creative differences. Stuff Elizabeth Banks almost made, but didn't. Was considered for Sue Storm in the 2005 Fantastic Four, almost directed Pitch Perfect 3, was considered for Gamora in Guardians of the Galaxy. She turned down a role in the Crazies remake because the role was too similar to her character in Slither. Was turned down for Mary Jane in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies because they felt she was too old, and she is actually the same age as Tobey Maguire.